Hey there, it's Yanis, and in this video, I'm talking about how you can reclaim your life through systems. By building systems for your business, you can become a 20-hour-a-week CEO or less, or more if you don't want to. But basically, you can increase your revenue dramatically while cutting your hours in half or even less, depending on how much you're working. So typically, most business owners work more hours to make more money. They think, I gotta make more money, I gotta work harder, I gotta work more. That's how they do it. But smart business owners restructure their time and 10x their revenue while working less. And this is what I'm going to be talking about. So right now, you're probably working 40, 60, maybe 80 hours every week. You're doing execution work that should be done by other people and probably costs between $10 and $50 an hour. I'm not saying that's all you do, but a lot of your time goes for tasks like this. You're probably answering too many questions of your team members on your own. You can't take time off without things collapsing and chaos exploding. And probably and all that means your revenue is also stuck at around 15K to 25K a month. That's just typically what I see. It can be more, it can be less. It's just a ballpark estimate based on my experience and work with clients. Now, where you could be is you could be working 20 to 40 hours a week. You could be doing $250 plus up to thousands and thousands of dollars an hour. You could be doing strategic work that can be worth $5,000 an hour or more to your business. It depends on your market and the size of your business, but certainly way more than like the low-level execution work, the busy work basically that too many founders get stuck with. You could have a team that handles everything independently. You can take vacations guilt-free. You don't have to log into Slack and check what's going on. And your revenue is typically uncapped, but don't want to make any crazy claims because the internet is full of them already. But you can go to 6 figures and plus a month if you have the systems. If you don't have the systems, you pretty much can't. I've never seen it. Like you can't just be like, unless you're like a one-man band consulting, that can work. But even then you're like capped at some point. You're going to want to build like a consulting firm or whatever if you want to go really higher. So basically, what's the difference? The difference isn't about productivity hacks or working harder. It's about fundamentally restructuring where your time goes. So typically during the week, so let's think about your typical week. So what would it cost to pay someone else to do everything that you are doing? Because you want to think about your business as if you are just somebody who's paid by the business to work there. Like most business owners, they tend to think just by default, I own the business. Therefore, it doesn't really matter if I pay myself or if I take everything out as profit. It does matter because you need to think long-term in terms of like how much would it cost for you to pay somebody else to do the work that you're currently doing. Because for all sorts of benefits that we don't have to talk about in this video, but basically what I'm saying here is you can put your work in different buckets and assign a dollar value to it, right? So for example, let's say you're still answering customer emails. So for example, let's say you're still answering customer emails here and there. It doesn't have to be all the time. That's maybe $20 an hour work, right? Could be less depending on how efficient you are with outsourcing and finding team members and that sort of stuff. Updating spreadsheets, $25 an hour, maybe coordinating your team. That could be worth more, maybe $50 an hour, maybe $100 an hour, depending on the level of expertise that's needed, how difficult your business model is, and how big your team is and all this sort of stuff. Now, let's say you're building partnerships that could 10x your revenue, or just launching new products or marketing initiatives, or even thinking about acquisition targets, or just preparing the business for exit if that's what you want to do, or like building systems. I think that's like the highest ROI you can do in your business. But that's basically a $2,000 plus an hour work. It could be more, it could be less. Again, depends on your business, depends on your market, and so on. So most founders are spending most of their time on the low value stuff. And that's why they get stuck, and that's why they get capped at personal, and that's why their growth is limited by their personal capacity. So overall, here's how you want to think about the work in your business. There are basically 3 types of work in any business until you start being the boardroom owner or you sell the business, and at which point I guess there's no work. But so basically there are 3 types of work in any business. And which type you spend your time on determines everything. It determines how much money you make, determines how much free time you get, how fast you can grow the company. So really you want to think about this, and as I go through and think about your week, how it looks like and which type of work you're doing. So here are the 3 stages of work, or the 3 buckets of work. First of all, there's the worker. Those are the people who, first of all, there's the worker level work. So that means execution tasks anyone can do with basic training. Customer service, fulfillment, posting content, handling admin, data entry, that type of stuff, right? If you're in the business every day and you're doing the actual work, you're getting stuck. That's where most founders start. Obviously, everybody starts doing everything in their business as you're growing it, right? But too many people get stuck there, right? So let's say that's between $10 and $50 an hour, depending on what type of execution work you're looking at. You could cover anything in that bucket with that kind of hourly, right? You can find somebody else, pay them this much, and they'll do the stuff for you. Now let's go one level higher. Now you got the manager level work, right? You're coordinating team members, project, driving the projects forward. So not just like executing on individual tasks, but you're designing the projects and the direction of the company a little bit already. You're answering team questions. So you got to manage people. You got to manage their performance. You got to handle conflict if needed and so on. That's typically between 50 and 250 an hour. Again, that's typically how much you have to pay to get a good manager inside your business, or that's usually how much you'll pay. Ballpark, again, it's typically you can get somebody between 50 and 250 an hour, depending on the size of the business, depending on the size of your team and the complexity and all this sort of stuff. Could even be lower. Maybe it's 30, 35, 40 bucks an hour. It really depends on your business. But basically, the point is it's higher paid than the worker level work, right? Paying somebody to manage your team is going to be more expensive than paying somebody to post on your social media. That's the nature. That's basically these are the levels that we're talking about. And then there's the CEO level work, which is the strategy and high leverage decisions. You're analyzing the performance data. You're optimizing systems. Very important. You're building partnerships. You're developing new revenue streams, strategic direction, new products, that type of stuff, right? And you're putting the team together and the systems in place so that the company can run efficiently without you having to do everything. Now, that's the kind of work that's the most expensive in the business because it's the most valuable, right? If you're the CEO, then that should be your biggest bucket. You should spend most of your time on that. But of course, you need to prepare ground so that other people can do the other type of work, right? So here's the thing. Most founders spend 85% of their time on worker level work, maybe 10% on manager work, and only 5% on actual CEO work, right? But the actual CEO work is the work that grows the business. So if you don't have the time to do the work that's needed to grow the business, and you're too busy like just doing the stuff that needs to get done every day to keep the doors open, then you're not really going to grow. You'll grow to a certain degree, and then it's going to grind to a halt and you're going to hit a wall. It's basically mathematical reality. You can't do it otherwise. But basically, that's completely backwards, right? So if your time goes into worker stage, so here's a simple visual representation of the three stages: worker stage, manager stage, and CEO stage. So here's another way to think about it. If you saw any of my previous videos, like I talk often about the 5 stages of entrepreneurs, like basically you go through the 5 stages as you develop. First, you're the worker, you're doing all the work in your business. Then you hire other people to do the work and you become the manager because now you have to manage them. Then you hire a manager, so you don't have to manage your team anymore, but now you can focus on CEO work. But again, you need to hire a manager for that, right? You can focus then on strategy. And then beyond that, you can hire a CEO to do the CEO work for you. And now you're what I called a boardroom owner, where like you just own the business. You're not involved at all. Maybe you have like monthly strategic calls with your leadership team or something like this to provide feedback and strategy. But that's basically it. And then level 5 would be you exit the business. But really, the first 3 levels are where 99% of small business owners live, basically. So you got the worker stage. If you're in the worker stage, that means most of your time is going to worker level work. Maybe 85% of your time in the business is spent on executing things that you could hire other people to do for you, and then you could up level to the manager level. But now here's the thing: because you're the owner, you still have to do the CEO level work and the manager work, because if you don't do it, then nobody will. So just that's where the saying comes in. That's where the saying comes from, that you're everything from the CEO to the janitor. You're wearing all the hats in the business, right? Same with the manager stage. Now at this point, you're still doing some of the work, because that's what I typically see with my clients. Like they'll hire a few people, and then now they have to manage them. But at the same time, in certain pockets of their business, they're still the ones executing the work. Whether that's like doing sales calls, maybe they're great with paid traffic and they're running the Facebook ads because they're the only one who learned it for their business, whatever it is. Or maybe they're out in the field, like doing the actual client work. Yeah. So you're managing the team, you're still doing the work, but you already have more time to also do the CEO level work, because now you have a team who's doing lots of the work level, lots of the activities inside the business for you. But where you really want to be is the CEO stage, where you can spend 80% of your time or more on CEO level. And that requires you have a manager, that requires you have a good team and the systems to support them so they can execute things without your involvement. That's basically it. But here's the thing. When you're a worker, you're grinding like crazy. You're putting 60 hours or more every week because you got to do all these things, right? When you're the manager, you can hire other people to do a lot of the things. Now you can start working less, but you're doing higher leverage activities, and they also demand sometimes like more brain power, right? So for example, I'm not saying it's easy to be a worker working like 60 hours a week, but it's very hard to do strategic work for 60 hours a week. It's just mentally draining, and the focus just isn't there for most people, for any human. But basically, you'll start working less and less because your time becomes more and more valuable. But that means the company's but the company's output is higher and higher because you're putting systems and teams in place that can deliver more than you on your own could, regardless of how long your working weeks are. But now, so let's talk about how you actually make the shift. Again, I talked about systems and team. That equals freedom. You need the systems in place, you need to hire a team, and then you put these two things together, and then you can start up leveling, right? But that's how it works. So if you're a worker and you want to become a manager, you're going to have to hire your... So now let's talk about quickly how you go from worker to manager to CEO. If you're a worker, you want to progress into a manager. Again, you're going to have to build your first systems and your first team members, because if you don't have systems, you can't hire people. You can, but you're going to have lots of chaos and it's going to cost you a lot of money. If you're a manager, you want to become a CEO, you got to build more advanced systems and hire somebody to manage the people for you. And then you can do the CEO level work and so on and so forth. I talked about a lot of this in my other videos. So I'm going to skip forward here to the tool that I want to show you. And that's my 20-hour-a-week CEO system or spreadsheet. So here it is. There's going to be a link below somewhere under this video so you can get all these resources. But basically, you want to start tracking where your time goes in the business systematically so you can improve the quality of your output systematically, right? If you don't measure it, it's not going to get improved. So here's a simple tool that you could use, and it's not going to take you a lot of time, maybe 5 minutes at the end of each day. First of all, you would do a daily time audit. So I would just keep it simple. Every day at the end of your day, you just put in the tasks that you were working on this day and assign them a level. Was it a worker level, manager level, or CEO level? So you have a simple bucket. So for example, if you're answering customer emails, then that's worker. If you're doing team meetings, then that's manager. If you're doing strategic planning, then there's the CEO. So you put this in, okay? Then each day you would just come here and you would estimate how much time you'd spent on certain activities. For example, let's say you've spent, and I would suggest you just convert it into hours, and you're going to ballpark it. You're not trying to be perfect. You're just trying to get a good idea, a good grasp of where your time is actually going to. So let's say you spend 1 hour on customer emails or customer support overall. Okay. Then let's say you had another hour on team meetings, and then you're going to have a bunch of activities like this throughout the day. And maybe you spend 1 hour of strategic planning, but then maybe you were also posting on Instagram. So let's say that took you an hour and so on. You get the picture. So you're going to add all the activities, and typically these activities are going to repeat day after day, or at least a few times a week, right? So if you're answering customer emails today, you're probably answering them also on some other days, right? Same for Instagram or like team meetings or whatever you're doing. So you can just leave these categories, and every day that you do something else, you keep adding the numbers in. So basically, so in this simple example, let's just say you just work 4 hours just to save some time typing in the different activities. So in that case, you would have worked 2 hours on worker level activities, 1 hour on manager level, and 1 hour on CEO level. So that would be your daily breakdown. And every day you want to add these numbers in as you go through so that you have a tracking system and you have a systematic way of seeing where your time goes. Then you would simply go to your daily progress tracker and you say, all right, how many hours did I work today? And you would say, today I worked, let's say 8 hours. Cool. And how many of those were spent on worker level hours? Let's say it was 4 hours. And then how many on manager? Let's say it was 3 hours. And 1 hour was spent on CEO level hours. And then that's going to calculate your current percentage with these formulas here. Then you would simply calculate the percentages, so you can whip out a calculator. I could also put these formulas into the sheet. You can do it yourself if you want, but like I noticed if I put a lot of formulas into a sheet, people like delete it by accident and then it's gone. So it's very simple, and it actually forces you to engage with your hours a little bit more. But simply what you would do is, okay, so how many hours did I work as a worker? You would just 4 divided by 8, right? Because you got 4 hours divided by 8 hours. That's 50%. You would add 50% here, and that's how it works. And then you would do the same for manager, in which case this would be, let's go back, 3 hours out of the 8, I worked as a manager. That's 37.5%. So the other one should be 12.5%, and that's it. And then here you have your current target. This is where you're trying to get at, right? So you could say, okay, I want to work not 30 hours per day, but I want to work, let's say 6 hours per day. That's my current target. Okay. And out of those hours, I want to be maybe 1 hour as a worker and maybe 2 hours as a manager. And the rest of it, I want to be as a CEO. And then you can keep adapting and see, okay, how close am I to reaching this goal? And then you go day after day and you're just adding these numbers. And you now have a simple way to track and think about your hours, because it's very basic, but if you don't think about it and if you don't force yourself to reflect and measure it, even in a simple way like this, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, you just put in your estimates. You're not really going to improve, right? Like you need, that saying, what gets measured gets improved. Here's a way for you to measure where your time is going. And just by measuring it, you will start finding ways to improve it. Then you have the same logic on the weekly level. I'm not going to go through the same exercise again, but here you would tell the dates for every week. And every week you would come in here, let's say on a Monday, you would add all the numbers up together from the previous week and you put them in here. And okay, this is my weekly target. Am I getting there? Am I not getting there? What's going on? And then on monthly progress, and then you got your monthly tracker, same. Maybe you want to, maybe your target, for example, is to work 100 hours a month. And you enter in what's your target here for the worker level hours, manager, and the CEO hours. And this is your percentage. And then every month you would come in here and you would type in the actual numbers that you have. And you would type in the actual breakdown of the hours where you're spending them and so on. So that's a simple sheet that you can use. I'll leave the link below so you can score and so you can measure where your time goes and start finding improvements every day and every week and every month. And if you do this, you'll probably be surprised of how little time you're actually spending on actual CEO work. At least most of the people I work with, they're very surprised. It's easy to underestimate how much busy work takes out of your day and your focus for higher level strategic growth activities, which is really where your focus should be at most of the time if you own the business. So again, you can use this tool, map out your transition, put in the numbers, start improving, you get ideas and so on. So I got all the resources below, just find the link, and that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. So the goal is not necessarily to just work less hours just for the sake of working less, although if that's your goal, that's also cool, and then you just optimize for that. But to find the hours that you're spending on lower level activities and move them from one bucket to a higher level bucket to then the CEO bucket, because that's how you leverage your time. This will also result in you working less, but it will also result in your company growing faster and you just having more time and you just having more fun running the company and more free time overall for the stuff that you like to do outside your business. So that's it. You will find the resources below. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.